So good day to each and everyone. My name is Kate Marie Belili and I will be presenting my PowerPoint presentation of week 3 and 4 carbohydrate metabolism and biochemistry. So what comes in your mind when you hear the word carbohydrates? Carbohydrates, as we all know, or carbs, are sugar molecules along with protein, fats. Carbohydrates are one of three main nutrients found in foods and drinks. So your body breaks down carbohydrates into glucose. Glucose, or blood sugar, is the main source of energy for your body cells, tissues, and organs. So what is carbohydrate metabolism? So, carbohydrate metabolism is the whole of the biochemical processes responsible for the metabolic formation, breakdown, and interconvention of carbohydrates in living organisms. Carbohydrates are central to many essential metabolic pathways. So, in this lesson, we are uh, we are in need to demonstrate the knowledge of carbohydrate metabolic pathways and their intermediate compounds. It will also explain the steps of carbohydrates digestion in terms of location, where they occur, and the product generated at each location. Next one, glycogen synthesis and degradation. So these processes occur in the liver. Glycogen synthesis and degradation are regulated to maintain blood glucose level as required to meet the needs of the organism as a whole. So glycogen is synthesized from monomer of UDP glucose by enzyme glycogen synthase, which progressively lengthen the glycogen chain with bonded glucose. Next is the glycogenesis. So as defined here in my PowerPoint, glycogenesis is the metabolic pathway by which glycogen is synthesized from glucose 6-phosphate. Glycogenesis is the process of glycogen synthesis in which glucose molecules are added to chain of glycogen for storage. So this process is activated during rest periods or following the Cori cycle in the liver, and also activated by insulin in response to high glucose. So glycogenesis is the formation of glycogen, the primary carbohydrate stored in the liver and muscle cells of animals from glucose. It also takes place when blood glucose levels are sufficiently high to allow excess glucose to be stored in liver and muscle cells. So there are three steps of glycogenesis and presented here in my PowerPoint. The first one is the isomerization, which is the formation of glucose 1-phosphate. Activation, wherein the formation of UDP, uridine diphosphate, and linkage to chain, which is a glucose to transfer a glycogen chain. Below there are glucose phosphate, given example of table of glycogenesis. So next is the glycogenolysis. Glycogenolysis is the metabolic pathway which glucose 6-phosphate is produced from glycogen. So it is a breakdown of the molecule glycogen into glucose. So a simple sugar that the body uses to produce energy. Glycogen is essentially stored energy in the form of a long chain of glucose. So glycogenolysis takes place in muscle and liver cells when more energy needs to be produced. There are two steps of glycogenolysis, the phosphorylasis and the isomerization. The phosphorylasis is the formation of glucose 1-phosphate, while the isomerization is the formation of glucose 6-phosphate. Note that glycogenolysis is not simple as the reverse of glycogen synthesis or glycogenesis because it does not require UTP or UDP molecules. Next is the gluconeogenesis. Gluconeo- Gluconeogenesis is the metabolic pathway by which glucose is synthesized from non-carbohydrate material. So it is a metabolic process by which organisms produce sugars, or namely glucose, for catabolic reaction from non-carbohydrate precursors. So glucose is the only energy source used by the brain with the exemption of ketone bodies during times of fasting. So the carbohydrate materials of gluconeogenesis are the pyruvate, lactate from muscle and from RBC, glycerol from tricylglycerol hydrolysis, certain amino acid from dietary protein hydrolysis. Example beside the terms are given in the PowerPoint. Next is the pentose phosphate pathway or hexose monophosphate shunt. So it is an initial reactant of the pathway in glucose 6-phosphate, termed phosphogluconate pathway because 6-phosphogluconate is one of the intermediates. Third name is pentose phosphate pathway because ribose 5-phosphate is one of its products. It means purpose of the HMP shunt are the following to produce ribose 5B for nucleotide synthesis, also produce NADPH from NADP plus for fatty acid, and steroid biosynthesis and for maintaining reduced glutathione or GSH inside the erythrocytes to convert pentoses and hexoses. So pentose phosphate pathway or the hexose monophosphate shunt is a metabolic pathway parallel to glycolysis. So it generates NADPH and pentoses as well as the ribose 5-phosphate precursor for the synthesis of nucleotides. So while the pentose phosphate pathway thus involves oxidation of glucose, its primary role is anabolic rather than catabolic. So example of table is presented beside the terms. Next is glycolysis. So in this section, we will be familiar with the details of both the 6-carbon stage and the 3-carbon stage of glycolysis in terms of reactant and products and various steps of each stage. So as defined in my PowerPoint, glycolysis is the metabolic pathway by which glucose AC6 molecule is converted into 2 molecule of pyruvate, which is the AC3 molecules, or the chemical energy in the form of ATP is produced, and NADH reduced coenzymes are produced. It is a linear rather than cyclic pathway that functions in almost all cells. So it is being defined that glycolysis is the conversion of glucose to pyruvate oxidation process in which no molecule oxygen is utilized. Oxidation agent is the coenzymes NAD+. Metabolic pathway in which molecular oxygen is not a participant called anaerobic pathway. So pathway that require molecular oxygen are called anaerobic pathway. So glycolysis is an anaerobic pathway. This is true statements of glycolysis. It is also the 10-step process in which each step is enzyme catalyst. 2-stage in overall process, a 6-carbon stage, and 3 carbon stage. All of the enzyme needed for glycolysis are presented in the cytosol, which is where glycolysis takes place. Details of the individual steps within the glycolysis pathway are now considered. So these are the stages of glycolysis. There are two parts, which are the C6 carbon stage, energy consuming stage, the C3 carbon stage, energy generating stage. Step 1 in carbon stage, energy consuming stage, is the hexokinase. Second, step 2, phosphoglucoisomerase. Step 3, phosphofructokinase. Step 4, the step 4 are being classified in carbon stage, energy generating stage, which is step 4 is algylase. Step 5 is the phosphotriose isomerase. Step 6 is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase. Step 7 is the phosphoglycerate kinase. Step 8 is the phosphoglycerate mutase. Step 9 is the enolase. And step 10 is the pyruvate kinase. So this is an example of the table of glycolysis steps. So in summing up everything, carbohydrates are the body's main source of energy. So they form the basis of our diet along with protein, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. Carbohydrates provide the whole organism with energy, especially the brain. So there are different types of carbohydrates. First one is the simple carbohydrate and the complex carbohydrate. Simple carbohydrate includes glucose, fructose, sucrose, which have 1 or 2 units of sugar, but complex carbohydrates include starch, glycogen, insulin, fiber, which are made up of string of at least 10 sugar molecules. So carbohydrates give some food their sweet taste, for example, the fruit. When we eat, carbohydrates in the food are broken down by the enzymes in our saliva and our digestive system. So simple carbohydrates, including glucose, are absorbed into the bloodstream via intestine wall. Glucose is then distributed throughout the body as energy, and the surplus is stored in the liver as glycogen. So when we fast, the glycogen stored in the liver gradually enters the bloodstream to ensure the organism has a constant supply of energy. So blood sugar level are regulated by 2 hormones, which is the insulin and glucagon. Insulin is secreted by the pancreas and lower blood sugar levels by storing glycogen in the liver. Glucagon also secretes by the pancreas, but it increases blood sugar levels by releasing glucose into the bloodstream. So a drop in the blood sugar level or the hypoglycemia can cause fainting, fatigue, dizziness, sweating, trembling, headache, palpitations, or neurological dysfunctions. So these symptoms may appear pancreatic or hepatic pathologies, tumors, or following a dose of hypoglycemic medicines. On the other hand, a rapid increase in blood sugar levels can lead to a deregulation and have harmful consequences in the long term. So weight gain, even obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, excess carbohydrates having been turned into fat. But in order for us to consume carbohydrates in limited manner, we need also to be mindful of what we need to eat in order for us to normalize our body weight, and not just our body weight but also our physiological aspect.